All right. Well, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Why Influence podcast. Today, we've got an exciting guest. His name is Todd Uterstaedt. He's got a podcast himself where he talks to founders of companies that have, started out as founders and grown to CEOs of large public companies. So he's talked to a lot of big guests, over 100 episodes on his podcast. He's got a lot of positive feedback on there, tons of positive reviews, got over 100 positive reviews on iTunes. He does executive coaching. He helps people, think bigger with what it is that they're doing. So anyway, I just want to say thank you, Todd, for taking the time to come on and share with us today.
Jeremy, thank you for the invitation. It's a lot of fun. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So just real briefly, can you just summarize maybe 2 or 3 sentences what it is that your brand, from founder to CEO is all about?
Yeah, we help founders transition from starting a company to building a company by helping to build them as a leader. So, scale yourself as a leader while you're scaling your business. And we often say that, your business grows when you do. And so we kind of focus on that personal development. We think of ourselves as personal development accelerators for founders.
Nice. That's great. So you've been doing this podcast for a while. So before we jump into all that, do you mind sharing maybe an unintended consequence that you've either recently got or just a big one that you've had sometime in the past?
Yeah, there's one that happened to me in the last 24 hours. I've been working with a founder, and he's just an amazing founder, amazing personal brand, amazing impact. And I've found in the last 60 days that a lot of founders are really struggling with overwhelm because they're trying to reinvent their businesses because of COVID-19. And sometimes it's just like one question you ask someone that helps to open something up inside of them that they felt stuck in. And so I was working with him last night, and this morning I woke up to get a really nice email from him. I didn't think our conversation was overly impactful. But the unintended consequences is he's already taking action on a couple different things and already feeling better from last night to this morning. And it brought great joy to me to know, because he impacts so many other people's lives. And that gives me a lot of joy to know that they're going to benefit because he's in a better spot.
Awesome. Yeah. And you don't know, walking away from that he's taking action and doing all these things. So it's great that you get that feedback, but also that you made that impact when you weren't sure that you made that impact.
Yeah, I really wasn't, because sometimes, I, as a coach and as someone who cares deeply about the person behind the title of founder, you don't often know the impact you're having. And occasionally you get these little insights and you say, yes, that's exactly what I was hoping for, but I didn't know if it was going to happen.
Right. Nice.
Yeah.
You've got just so I have some clarity. I know that podcasting's a big part of what you do as far as like sharing your voice and stuff, but just to confirm, is podcasting your main platform right now for sharing?
It's
Or
not.
it's not?
Well, for sharing it is, yes.
Yeah, for sharing.
Yeah, for sharing, definitely the podcast is. And soon we're launching a bigger brand over from founder to CEO that will encompass other things that we're going to be doing as well.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do something a little bit different in this episode where usually we dive deep into your why and then we go into the tips and tricks. But I'd like to just sort of start off with giving some advice to people. I mean, so the mission of the podcast is to help other people overcome the barriers to sharing big and to going bigger with whatever it is that their mission is. So since you've got a lot of experience with podcasting and you've got this successful podcast, let's talk a little bit about maybe some of the biggest advice for people that are looking to start a podcast. What would be some of the biggest piece of advice that you would share with someone that you meet that's like, hey, I'm thinking about starting, or I just started and I'm figuring things out?
Don't do it. No, just kidding. See, on your website, you have a picture of you and John Lee Dumas. So I know you know John Lee Dumas, and I think you had him on a show as well. And you just interviewed a friend of mine, Daniel J. Lewis, who's big podcaster. And so, we all know each other. And I guess, I learned so much from all of them that I feel like so not the right guy to ask that question. But I think probably the biggest thing I've learned is if you're thinking about podcasting, you have to realize it's an enormous undertaking and you really have to be committed to it at the very least a year to be able to give yourself the ability to be able to determine whether or not it still works for you and also the people you're trying to serve, because it is not a half-hearted decision. I don't care what anyone says. I mean, if it is, if you say you have a business and you just wanted to have it as another possibility that you get leads and occasionally you do a podcast and it's on your website, that's fine, I suppose. But if you're committing to be a podcaster, it's a big commitment. And I think you have to say, okay, I'm going to commit to doing this at least a year to be consistent enough to see whether or not the people I want to help, it's helpful, and whether or not it's a rhythm of life that's going to work for you as well.
Okay. Yeah, that's great advice. I think that, it definitely, a lot of people don't understand that you can't just create like one thing and then call it a day. And it's like, hey, now I'm done. It's more about keeping it going, right? Like a lot of YouTubers talk about that. So you can't just create one video and be like, okay, now I'm an influencer, or, like a consistent, yes. Well, I don't have 1 million followers kind of thing.
Yeah. I had Evan Carmichael on my show a couple weeks ago, and he's 2 million YouTube followers. I've never seen Evan, but he's quite prolific, and he said the same thing to me. He said, I mean, it took a while to be able to get to the point in time where he could be influential.
Right. Awesome. So let's say you meet someone who's a little bit further along in podcasting, and everyone's doing something a little bit different. Do you have anything that you feel like is like a little bit of a secret sauce, or like something that you're doing that's different than someone else that you think has helped you in your podcasting career?
So I want to answer this question, but I want to do so by some feedback I get from people. Okay. Because, you don't always know, but occasionally people tell me this, and I think it might be my secret sauce, but when I tell it to you, it's going to sound non-humble because, they're talking about me. Okay. I get a lot of feedback that say, Todd, that was very therapeutic. After I have my podcast interview with them, because for me, it's not an interview. I am trying to not only give insights to my audience, but help my guests tie things together about themselves so that they walk away feeling like that was a positive experience for them as well. And I think that's my secret sauce, to be honest with you. I really want my guests to be able to walk away getting a lot out of it, just as much as my audience.
Yeah, that's huge. I could see that too. I feel like I've had some experiences similar to that up to this point. Like a recent guest of mine is a YouTuber, and he does video games online. And after our conversation, I see that he took some of the things that I brought up were like, are you live streaming on Twitch or on YouTube? Or like, are you thinking about different kinds of content or being more frequent? And like, I don't know if we sparked more motivation or brought some ideas to table, but it's nice to see that, I've made an impact on someone as a guest. And that's, a lot of times not something I intended to do either.
Yeah. Well, and the dirty little secret of being a podcaster when you're interviewing people is like, I learned so much about myself. And I learned so much more from all of them. I'm like always collecting all these insights. And so I'm like, we may be sharing their insights, but you and I both know that, wow, we learned so much about ourselves too.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely true.
Yeah.
So what kind of, I guess, as far as like, reasons for podcasting, like what kind of doors have opened, like thinking about like before you had your podcast to where you are today as a result of the podcast, like what kind of opportunities, what kind of doors open for going down this path?
A lot. Well, first of all, meeting hundreds of amazing people that I would never have had an opportunity to meet, particularly. So it's hard for me to travel because my wife is a physician and we have kids. And so I can't go to a lot of the conferences that a lot of people go to. And it's hard for me to travel around the country. Well, it's hard for everyone right now to travel. But and so podcasting has allowed me to be able to build a relationship with people that I never would have had the possibility to do so. My podcast associate producer, which is a new role we have, she just got the founder of Netflix to agree to come on our show next week.
Wow.
And, I would never have an opportunity to talk to the founder of Netflix if I didn't have a platform with which to be able to get them to share their thoughts and ideas. So that's just one, is meeting people who are truly amazing and have experiences that I can learn from, their audience can learn from. But then, I didn't start the podcast in a very auspicious way. I know a lot of people out there, well, we're going to build this podcast and we're going to build this business around it, do this and this, and they're all planful about it. I started it because I got all these phone calls from founders who said, hey, Todd, I need a coach, but our business model was not set up to support them. It was too expensive, too intrusive. And so I thought, I'll just start a podcast and I'll interview successful founders about their non-hero stories going from founder to CEO. And it took off. So the other thing happened was they told me what they wanted. They wanted a mastermind type group. So we started Trail Team 10. And the problem was, Jeremy, is I'm not a good marketer. I'm really not. And so it was great experience. We did Trail Team 10 3 times. It was a 6-month cohort of 10 founders. But getting founders into it was a bear for a long list of reasons. So we've learned from that. And now we're going to start our own membership platform soon called Founder Life. And so the other gift was I learned more about how to be able to listen to the audience about what they need to be able to create things that's going to be useful and helpful to them.
Yeah. And that started with giving the podcast.
That's right. Started the podcast, giving the podcast away. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome. So going to that a little bit, let's, did you, what was your sharing like before the podcast? Like, were you a public speaker? Like, what did the world look like back when you started the podcast?
Well, so I'm a former Army intelligence officer. Okay. And so I spent a large chunk of my 20s in SCIFs, special compartmentalized information facilities. You don't share anything going on in your life or anything in your professional life. So I remember when the very first time I started sharing was I went on LinkedIn. I made a LinkedIn profile. That's where I felt most comfortable, because Twitter and Facebook, it's just, And so when I decided to do the podcast, it was a very big leap for me because I'm so used to not sharing. And so I was in John Lee Dumas's mastermind group, and they were talking about, and also in Podcasters Paradise. And they were talking about, well, your first episode should really be talking about sharing a lot about you and about why you're doing this. And I found that really hard, really, really hard. So truth be told, I do reveal things about me and I share things about me over the last 5 years, but it's few and far between. And over the time, I felt more comfortable increasing that because I've had to kind of overcome my own, like the way my brain is set up, because as an intelligence officer, you don't share anything. Yeah. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. So you really, did you do that first episode where you talked all about yourself?
I did. Yeah.
Okay.
I did. And that was hard.
And that was the first time that you were that vulnerable publicly in a larger level.
Absolutely. Yep. I've been a speaker, not like a big time speaker going across country, but just like local speaker stuff, which is not a big deal for me because I'm an extrovert anyway, and I'll talk. But being more vulnerable and sharing about all that, like one of the things I talk to people about is that, I'm a former Army officer, but I think I was a lousy leader. And so like, that's why I started the podcast, because I wanted to help founders navigate some of the same stuff that I think probably I still haven't conquered, And so having to share that along the way about my own issues as a leader along the way, I think has been helpful to me and them.
Yeah. So you just mentioned you started your podcast because you felt like you were a lousy leader and you wanted to get better at that and probably other things. So let's talk a little bit about that. Like,
sure.
For you, like what was your biggest why for starting your podcast? Let's go a little bit there. Deeper
yeah. There. Well, it really was very practical at first because I was feeling guilty. Our business was not set up for the founders who were calling us. So a lot of the founders were graduating from incubators and accelerators in the Midwest. And it was suddenly cool to be a founder in the Midwest. And so they would call me, hey, Todd, we heard you're a really good coach. Will you work with me? And we were too expensive. So it was very practical. Like, well, what can I do to help all these people who need help but can't afford expensive executive coaching? Okay. So that was the first thing. The second thing is that I felt like, back to vulnerability, I get very passionate about this. I get so sick and tired of the entrepreneurial hero story that people read about in Fast Company, Entrepreneur Magazine, Forbes, and all these forums. Because I know behind the scenes what happens for my own self and all the founders who I work with. And so I wanted a place where founders can, a safe place that founders can be vulnerable. I can be vulnerable with them. And then, because people consume podcasts when they're doing other stuff, that they could take away one little nugget and get a little bit closer to examining themselves. So a safe place for founders to be vulnerable so we can all learn from that. Because you don't often hear that stuff, Jeremy, as you know. I mean, you do that on your show, but it's hard to get people to be vulnerable. We had Seth Godin on our show. Everybody knows Seth Godin. He's a great guy. And I said to Seth, more than happy to have you on the show, but you're going to have to tell a personal story of vulnerability about your transitioning from founder to CEO. Sure, Todd, no problem. He comes on the show. He was kind of being a little squirrely about it, Jeremy. A little squirrely. But then, he started getting more comfortable as I kind of eased him into it. We all struggle, I think, with being vulnerable. Me and even Seth Godin, right?
Right. So you started your podcast to help the people that are reaching out to you and the people that are out there that can't afford executive coaching because it's expensive. And you wanted a safe place for founders to share these vulnerable stories to help other people and get more reach with that. But why was that important to you? Like, why was it important to have an outlet for that and to help those people?
So I have lived around the world as an Army intelligence officer, and I have seen something, and I want to share the story with you because it's like burned in my psyche. I truly believe founders and entrepreneurs are the ones that will change and save the world. Okay, I truly believe that. When I was stationed in Korea, up on the demilitarized zone back in the 90s, we were out in the middle of nowhere, and we surrounded ourselves with triple strand razor wire to protect us at nighttime, and so no one would steal our stuff. And a lot of the engineering soldiers that I was with, I was the intelligence officer, and I was also in charge of security. I saw this kind of break in the wire, and I was upset. I said, "Hey, we got to close the wire. Security, an Army officer, right?" And so they said, "Hey, calm down, Lieutenant Uterstaedt. You don't know what's going to happen." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" Here comes this young woman, probably in her late 20s, pulling a cart behind her with 2 kids. Okay. And she came in and made hot meals for all the soldiers. That was her business. She basically was doing catering service to soldiers who were out in the field. And I'm like, oh my goodness, who is this person? And she said to me, "I believe in entrepreneurship and I want my children to see this. And the way for me to be able to have an impact on their lives and my life is to be able to come cook for all the soldiers as an entrepreneur." And I was like, whoa, are you kidding me? So, that's always been in the back of my mind. And I just know that communities, towns, villages are uplifted when founders can be able to focus on solving practical problems that uplift the lives of others. And I know that you can't do that unless you truly understand your own vulnerabilities and your own motivations.
Yeah, I love that. That's a powerful story too, with the lady bringing her kids in. So you're seeing that the founders and entrepreneurs are the people that are going to sort of save the world. Do you mind elaborating a little bit on that? Like, what does that look like? Or
over the last couple of weeks, I've been fortunate to interview a lot of people that will be coming up on the show soon, who are actively working on solutions to the problems that COVID-19 has been bearing down on the world. And I have just learned that it's usually men and women like that rather than a government entity, for example, or a very big, large corporation, right? They are the ones that solve problems. The founding CEO of Surfacide, I think next week or the week after will be, and he has this lighthouse that they put in rooms in hospitals that uses UV lights to be able to kill all the bad bugs in a room using UV light. And they're actively trying to be able to, use that even more effectively in hospital room, kill the COVID-19 virus. I'm talking to a woman soon who is going to has these devices that you put in front of doors, and as you walk through them, they do your biometrics, so that they can make sure that people showing up to work, if they have a fever or other things that the sensors are picking up, it will alert them to make sure that they can keep the workplace safe. So it's examples of men and women like that that I truly believe there's thousands of them around the world right now who are actively trying to solve varying degrees of problems. There's a company in Northern Kentucky, I live in Cincinnati, who pivoted their entire company just to be able to increase the number of testing to be able, from their business model, which was not doing testing for COVID-19. And so it's these men and women who care deeply about other humans and who are smart on their area or domain, that they're the ones that are going to continue to be able to solve the problems of COVID-19 and a lot of other issues that we'll face as human beings in the future. Those two good examples because they blow me away with what their energy and the excitement about doing this.
Yeah, for sure. And so the idea behind the podcast is that you're enabling and scaling up the capacity of the people out there listening to your podcast, or even the guests that you're helping change mindsets on the spot, or think bigger. You're affecting all those people, and in turn, those people are then doing bigger things and better things, and that's sort of how you're making an impact as a result of your podcast.
I hope so, because when we conquer ourselves, then we can conquer world problems. Right? Like we really have to know ourselves first, what our strengths and limitations are, what we're not good at, what our pet peeves are, what our motivations are. When we conquer ourselves, then we can do all the things that founders like to use, the words like to use, disrupt, innovate, all those types of things, right? But we've got to conquer ourselves first.
And so you said you started the podcast because you had all these people reaching out for the coaching services, but were you, like, as far as your background goes, were you a founder to CEO, and did you live through what it is that you're coaching these people and you have the podcast about? Can you share a little bit of that backstory?
Yeah, sure. So back in 2005, I said to my wife, I have this business idea, and a buddy of mine, Kyle, he and I were in the Army together, and I said to her, I think Kyle and I want to start a business. And she says, okay. And so I decided to take her out to dinner and present to her a 35-page slide deck. Now, slide decks nowadays are much more poignant and to the point, and there's certain slides. I wasn't so savvy about that back then. So I pitched my wife in 2005 to launch our company, Baker and DeBall. And she agreed to be my investor. And thankfully, it all worked out, and we're still married too, 19 years later. And so, we started our own company in 2005. It's been very successful, and I really appreciate the issues that all of us encounter as founders. And I want founders to be able to hustle less, have more impact, and lead a great life. And unfortunately, many of us buy into this belief, you need to destroy your 20s and 30s and 40s in order to be able to be a founder of a successful company. Absolutely not. I want to help accelerate the fact that you don't have to live a crazy life. You can live a great life as a founder.
Right. That's amazing. And so are these things that you felt like you struggled with through your journey that you're trying to share? Is it sort of like a resource you wish you had back when you were founding your business back in 2005 as far as your podcast goes?
Absolutely. So I weave in my own problems and experiences with also kind of doing our podcast has been a qualitative research study also. In fact, I hired someone to listen to every single podcast and categorize all the issues, problems, and complaints that founders have and kind of get an insight of what's really happening. And we take that and also all the research others are doing, and we're about ready to package it all together. Say, hey, listen, my own experiences, our research and interviewing founders for 5 years, and also others' research, really pull that together so that we can have a positive impact on founders' lives.
Right. Yeah, that's huge. I'm looking forward to that. So when's that coming out? Or your next?
I knew you were going to ask me that. So it's called Founder Life. I guess I can say that now because we have the domain. It will be a personal development accelerator for founders. I think we're trying to go live in October, but prior to that, we're launching a course called Stress-Free Founder, where we teach founders how to be able to identify their stress behaviors and triggers of their stress behaviors so that they can get back to their positive self and not their stress self.
Nice. Yeah. I think that's really important.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that.
All right. So let's go back to when you started your podcast, because you had to create this first episode where you had to be really vulnerable in a place where you're not so comfortable doing so. What made you overcome the barriers there? You weren't comfortable doing it. So why did you decide to be vulnerable, to decide to create that first episode? Like what got you over that hump? Like what did that look like for you?
So, as you can see behind me, I'm a learner anyway. I'm like, I absorb information. It's like I breathe in books. I've got my own Amazon drone that comes to my house. No, I'm just kidding. But so when I said to myself, okay, I think I want to do this podcasting thing, I said, well, how do I learn how to do it? Well, I just went on Google and I searched how to start a podcast. And the first thing that popped up was this thing called Podcasting A to Z by this guy named Cliff Ravenscraft. And I'm looking at his webpage, just going through it. And then, I don't know, my eyes were drawn to the top right-hand corner of the page, and he had his phone number on there. And it was area code 859. And I remember looking at this, and I was talking to my wife about it, and I said, oh, 859. Oh my gosh, that's Cincinnati. That's Northern Kentucky. And I realized he was a local guy, and I said, you know what? Maybe I should just take this course. So I took his Podcasting A to Z course from Cliff Ravenscraft, and he did it in a really neat way. He had each week he had another component that he released in terms of learning, and on Fridays he had like a very lengthy Q&A session with all the members in his course. And it was in listening to all of the anxieties and fears and vulnerabilities of everyone else in that course that I suddenly said to myself, well, everybody has those struggles. And it became okay for me to also worry about that as too. And then listening to them, how they overcome it, and basically listening to those other participants in the class made me feel much more comfortable. But also Cliff did a great job of preparing us for all that and giving us kind of an outline of how that first episode looks like or could look like. And I made it my own. And so it was really his course. And so because I'm sometimes a perfectionist, I'll admit too that I took the course a second time. Relatively quickly after that, because I was like, I needed to marinate it in some more until I was really comfortable. All right, and then I felt comfortable, and that's when I launched the first episode of From Founder to CEO.
Okay, so it was more the lengthy Q&A sessions and seeing other people having the same struggle for you to realize, hey, I'm not alone in this, and that this is something that I need to do to get this thing going, to make the impact you want to make.
Yeah, because I bought into the concept, as you are aware, that nowadays you have to give a certain amount of content, free content, to be able to build a group of people who know, like, and trust you digitally, right? And so I bought into that concept. And I think that is truthful to a degree, although over the years I've learned that be careful about how much free content you do. Eventually, you have to build a digital sales funnel, which is what we've been learning nowadays too.
Right. Yeah, 5 years into it, right?
Exactly. I'm kind of embarrassed saying that, but yeah, right.
No, I mean, it means you're a giver, right?
I guess.
So what other, that's the sort of a big barrier you had in the beginning. Did you have other big barriers, either like in the beginning or through your journey? Anything that you'd be willing to share? Oh,
absolutely. Okay. So in the beginning, I have an interview podcast, right? So there's a lot of interview podcasts. And the interviewing on podcasts has turned into a little bit of a cottage industry. It wasn't so much 5 years ago, but now there's a cottage industry around launching books on podcasts and being a guest speaker on podcasts for like an entire year while you're trying to launch things, whatnot. But reaching out to some of the, we'll just call them A-lister founders out there, I felt very uncomfortable doing in the beginning. Because I said to myself, why would they want to come on my show, right? I'm a nobody. In fact, so much so that I reached out to this one founder. I won't say the name because I don't want to cause any problems. But and he was very snarky coming back to me. He said to me, well, when you have a bigger platform and it's worth my time to be able to come on your show, I'll consider coming on your show. But until then, don't contact me again. I was like, oh, all you have to do is say no. You didn't have to rake me over the coals, Right. So that kind of stung for a little while, to be honest with you. And then over the course of time, what happened was we get like 15 to 20 pitches a day now of people come on the show. And so it started shifting a bit and started feeling more comfortable reaching out and doing so in a way that helps them. So for example, a lot of the A-lister founders, Jeremy, they come on my show because they're launching a book and they want to use the podcast as a vehicle to launch their book. And I don't mind, but here's the issue. Behind my head, I cannot have someone on my show if they wrote a book and I haven't read the book. I mean, I just literally, I just can't. I would feel guilty. So I read all their books, which is a lot of time too, and I've had to integrate that into my life because some of these books are good, some of them are not, but I need to make sure that if they took the time to write a book and I'm going to come on my show and be vulnerable, I got to read their stuff. So that was another one. Besides getting over the A-lister kind of phobia about reaching out to them, and it was also, okay, well, how do I integrate reading all these people's books when I come on my show? Those were two big ones.
Yeah. So how long was it from when you're reaching out to people to get guests to when you started to get people requesting to come on your show?
I would say probably about 2 years.
All right.
And so we're a once a week podcast, although I do bonus episodes. Like I've been doing some bonus episodes the last couple weeks to help people with COVID-19. But yeah, so it's once a week. So 2 years is really how long it took. And I got some more snarkiness in that 2 years from other people. I got some nice no's. And then funny how at the 4th year mark, some of those people who weren't nice to me in the beginning, they suddenly started reaching out to me. And I was nice about it. It was like, well, that's sure, come on the show. But I didn't remind them that they were kind of snarky in the beginning because that wouldn't be nice. But then in the last year, I have an amazing associate podcast producer named Nancy, and she's much better at all that than me. And she's the one who, as I mentioned, the founder of Netflix is coming on our show, I think in 2 weeks. And she's the one who's been reaching out to many of them and getting to come on. Dr. Gundry, Stephen Gundry, he's like the doctor for Kelly Clarkson, a whole bunch of other people, Usher. He was on our show. We've already recorded the interview, but this is all because someone better than me knows how to reach out and talk to these individuals.
Nice.
So,
yeah, that's amazing. I was looking through your podcast and the types of guests that you've had on there, and I mean, I recognize like a lot of the people that are on there. So
thanks. Yeah. Well, they've been so generous to being vulnerable because I don't let them come on the show unless they're going to be vulnerable. And it is hard. People have varying degrees of vulnerability that they share with the world, right? And so I have occasionally people who really want to go out of their way and be super vulnerable about things. And I say to them, well, I don't know if we should share that. I don't want to put you in a bad situation. Oh, no, right. I want to share that. So, are you sure? Because, there are varying degrees. You don't want to do any damage to your personal brand or hurt someone. I had someone come who wanted to talk about their co-founder. And that's often an issue when you're going from founder to CEO, dealing with co-founder conflict. Very, very common. As a matter of fact, I help a lot of founders and co-founders kind of mediate those issues. And I said to him before we started recording, I said, "Did you share these issues with him yet?" "Oh, no, not yet. I said, "Oh, no. You're not coming on my show. It's the first time your co-founder's hearing all these issues is listening to my show. That's not fair to your co-founder." "Oh, yeah. Okay, Todd, you're probably right."
Nice. Turned into sort of a private coaching session that you didn't publish, or?
Oh, well, we talked about a different subject.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You changed on the spot.
Yeah, we changed on the spot. And then afterwards, I said to him, "Hey, listen, here's some things to think about as you navigate your relationship with your co-founder." And he was very appreciative.
Nice. So as far as who you are today versus who you were when you first started your podcast, like what kind of transformations have you experienced? I mean, obviously, when you started, you had a big difficulty being vulnerable and sharing some of that stuff in the first episode. But what are some things that you feel like have changed about who you are as just a human being as a result of doing podcasting?
I probably listen differently and more deeply now. In the beginning, I thought I needed to share like my expertise, but in reality, I get so many emails from people who say to me, "Todd, I love how you let your guests talk and how it's not about you." So people listen to the Joe Rogan show because they want to hear Joe, right? They like Joe, or they listen to name, and that's not me. And I have to realize that why people listen to my show, and they listen to my show because they really want to hear the insights of my guests. And so I've tried to be better at just listening to them and kind of highlighting what they're saying, underscoring, refining, reframing what they're saying so that my audience gets what they're really, really looking for. So that shift, because I'm an extrovert, I'm a former Army officer, and like on the spot during these conversations, like, well, have you considered this? And did you do this? And like, coach, but that's not what people are looking for. Now that's a different type, right? Because that could be coaching someone live, but that's not the format of our show. So that's listening more deeply is probably one. I will also tell you that slowly giving up, and this is an issue with many founders, like giving up responsibilities and letting go on certain things, so having a podcast producer, associate producer was a big deal for me. The next thing I hopefully will give up soon, but after 5 years, I still edit every single episode myself.
Wow, that's impressive.
I actually enjoy doing it, and it gives me an opportunity to re-listen to the conversation. But I am also have learned a very, very big, I am not a good marketer. And so the next step is to have someone help us get the show out there in a different way, because I'm just really not good at all that stuff. I there's so many permutations now of trying to different channels. I don't have the podcast on YouTube. I know I'm supposed to be on YouTube. I know all those things, but I just realized I'm just not good at putting all that together. And so we've hired some people now to help us with that.
Nice. Yeah. So you've become a better listener, and you're better at letting go of responsibilities, which is probably something that comes a little bit easier with talking to other people to help them let go of responsibilities so that they can be like better leaders. You would think
I would figure that out by now, since almost every founder who comes on my show talks about how hard it is to let go on certain things. You'd think I'd learned that myself so far, but it's part of the maturation process, I think, of any founder, and I want to.
Yeah. I mean, I think like a big reason for me with starting my podcast is like I wanted to surround myself by people who are better than me at what it is I'm trying to get better at. And one of those things was communication and vulnerability and authenticity. So I feel like I'm growing a lot in those directions as a result of the podcast. And similarly, I think it's probably true for what it is what you're doing.
Have you shared with your podcast audience yet any of your transformational vulnerabilities?
A little bit. I did my solo episode. I did my first episode where I shared my story and talked about the podcast, and then I had a friend interview me after 10 interviews. After 10 interviews, after 20 interviews, and then after 30 interviews, I did the live stream update episode, which is what he challenged me to do. And then from then, I think I'm around 50 interviews now, and I haven't done another update interview, so I need to do something there. But I try to keep sharing the journey through the process, at least through these update episodes.
I probably need to do that too. Maybe you should come on my show and interview me about that, because I do think a lot of people benefit from that. And now that you just said that, I have not done that. I'm gonna go back and listen. I'm gonna go listen to that episode that you did that, because you got me curious now too.
Okay, yeah, I'd be happy to be a guest, interviewer, or if you want to. I guess this isn't really targeted towards that, but I'd be happy to let you just share this on your podcast if that was of interest.
Yeah, absolutely, that'd be great.
So as far as people that you've impacted, you talked about how now you've been doing this for 5 years. You're getting 10, 15 people reaching out to you every day, asking them to be guests on the show. So you're having this influx of people wanting to be a guest. You're reaching a lot of people. So what did it look like when you first got your first, or how long was it before you got your first unintended consequence when you started your podcast? And then what did the transition look like as far as when that ramp up period, what that felt like to you?
Well, the first unintended consequence was when I decided to launch a podcast. I had a lot of friends, Army friends, coaching friends who in the coaching industry, who said, "Oh, what are you doing, Todd? What is this that you're doing?" Right? And some have told me it gave them the courage to be able to launch their own podcast. So that was kind of interesting. I wasn't trying to do that. That wasn't expected. And many of them tell me that they're glad they did that for all the reasons people talk about having a podcast. So I would say that was with my first couple months, maybe, because I started sharing on social media, about my new podcast and whatnot. So that was probably the first one, first couple months.
Okay. And that was pre-launch. Just this fact that you're saying that you want to do a podcast.
Yeah, because I perseverated so much on the name of the podcast. So I was asking people to do some surveys. And so I asked a lot of people to do that and giving feedback on the name. And in the process of doing that, like, oh, well, what is all this podcasting stuff? And that was the catalyst for some of them. Yeah.
Awesome. And so after you started your podcast, because a common issue with podcasting is it's not like other platforms where people can leave comments and really easily engage with you. They have to literally leave the platform and then go somewhere to like send you an email or send you a message on another social platform to hear from guests. So it's a little bit harder. You can see bigger numbers with minimal, hearing. So I'm just curious what that transition felt like for you.
So about 2.5 years ago, so maybe about that 2.5 year mark, I had a guest on my show, and her name is Rebecca Okamoto. And she was an amazing guest. And she was kind of a little bit of a different guest, where she was a little bit more of an expert on communication for founders, but also she was a founder of her company. Anyway, I did not realize that she told me like a couple months later that all these founders were contacting her now to take advantage of her business. And I said, oh, that's cool. And then a couple weeks after that, one of my guests emailed me and said, hey, Todd, just want to let you know, one of the editors of Entrepreneur Magazine contacted me because they listened to your show, and they put me in Entrepreneur Magazine because I was on your show. I was like, oh, okay, well, that's cool. And then Kyle Racky from Proposify up in Canada emailed me and said, hey, Todd, one of the writers from Time Magazine was listening to my interview on your show and didn't interview me, and we ended up in Time Magazine because your show. I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. Wow. And then someone else contacted me about Fast Company. And then so, that was a very big unintended consequence. I suppose what had happened was some of the other media outlets were paying attention to some of the guests, because I do also like to bring on founders who don't have a lot of visibility yet, but have a great story to tell. And so some of them listen to the show, and and then their message gets amplified, and that helps them build their business more, which is very gratifying to me. Okay.
Right.
So I did not expect that to happen. So then fast forward about 1.5 years after that, Rebecca contacted me, and she said to me, Todd, I just want to tell you something. I cannot listen to your show without hopping off my treadmill or her elliptical, I think it was, without taking notes on some of the things that these people said. Like, oh, okay, well, that's great. She's super helpful. And then here's the crowning story, Jeremy. Okay, this is the part that really cracked me up. So I'm at an entrepreneurship award event in Cincinnati. Okay. I was receiving an award with a whole bunch of other people, and it was a very nice event, but I'm not really into award ceremonies. And so I'm standing there, we're doing this photography session, and some guy comes up to me and he says to me, I know you. And then he walked away. I'm like, okay, well, what was that all about, right? And so he comes back and says, oh, I figured out who you are. I know you. I listen to you're Todd Uterstaedt, and I listen to your podcast when I commute back and forth from Cincinnati, Ohio to Columbus. And I said, oh, okay, great, thanks. And and he said, let's get together sometime. And I said, okay. So I didn't know who he was, and like, you gotta be careful sometimes with this stuff. So I said, okay, well, just reach out to me on LinkedIn so I can see who he is, and then we'll decide to go to lunch. So he did. So we set up lunch. We go to this restaurant. I'm sitting. I said to him, oh, did you have a hard time finding the restaurant? He says, oh, no, my building's right across the street. And I said, oh, my building's right across the street. And he said, oh, this building? I said, yeah, I'm in that building. And I said, where are you in the building? He says, I'm in this hallway. I'm like, that's my hallway. And we're 2 doors down from each other. Never even knew it. And he says to me, Todd, I mean, I'd listen to your podcast because it has helped me so much and build my business, because I listen for 2 reasons. One is you always have guests who are doing unique and innovative things. And I ask myself, do I need that service, or do I need to pay attention to that new innovation? It's like, oh, that's cool. And he says, the second thing is I often have to pull over the side of the road and take notes on the stories that people tell, because I ask myself, have I conquered that issue yet? And if I have, it's kind of like Jerry Springer. Whew, Thank God I don't have to deal with that again, right? Or they said to them, or he said to himself, do I need to think about that going forward? And I was like, you pull alongside of the road to take notes on it? Really? He says, well, yeah, you also don't give notes on your show. I don't do that yet. And so I was like, wow. I mean, I had no idea that people were, really learning. And so it's so gratifying. To your point, you don't often know.
Yeah.
So when you hear those stories, it's so gratifying. You say, okay, I'm helping. And that's exactly what I want to do.
Yeah. And if you didn't meet that guy like in person there, you would have never known that this guy is, that dedicated and listening.
That's right. I would have never known. Yep.
Yeah. Yep. That's powerful. That's amazing. So you've been doing podcasting for, 5 years now. If you can share whatever you're comfortable sharing, but, I've had several people request that I ask like how you're making a living, I guess. You started your podcast pitching the idea to your wife or I guess that was for your business.
The business, yes.
The business, okay. Yeah. So is the podcast, is that a source of income for you? Is it bringing leads in to feed another business? Like, if you don't mind sharing just like the ecosystem from a high level.
Happy to share. Yeah, I'm gonna open a book on this because I do think there's a lot of smoke and mirrors around all this topics, and so I like the fact that when you ask your guest that. One is we make zero money on the From Founder CEO podcast. When we had Trail Team 10, which was our 6-month cohort of 10 founders, mastermind. Yep. Obviously, we charge people for that. I think it was $3,000 per person for 6 months. So not too high price point, but also, a decent price point. And we did that 3 times. Then we determined that, getting a lot of the founders gave us feedback. So Todd, 6 months is a long time to stay committed to something. And even 1 hour a week to be live and synchronously is a lot. And so the podcast has me been giving, and then soon we advertise Stress Free Founder, which is our course that we'll have coming out soon, and then also Founder Life will be our membership platform as a personal development accelerator for founders. So soon, the podcast will hopefully be a indirect revenue generator to advertising that course, which then leads into our membership.
But you do have this executive coaching business, and
yes,
the credibility that it brings. Maybe has it opened doors with maybe previous guests or listeners to come in? Like,
yes.
Has it fed from? Okay.
Yeah, so we do one-on-one coaching and group coaching, and yes, it definitely feeds our company, Baker and DeBall, which is our coaching business. And a funny thing happens too. It's kind of really interesting. Have you ever heard the expression "you can't be a prophet in your own land"? Have you ever heard that before?
I have heard that. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you ever see that in your own world where, like, if you live, I forget where you live.
I'm in Atlanta.
Atlanta. Okay. So the Atlanta Chamber of Commerce may not necessarily want you to be a speaker, but Las Vegas might, because say, oh, who's this guy who has this Why Influence podcast? He interviews all these people and he's an expert on this area, right? But for some reason, Las Vegas thinks you're awesome, right? Well, it's kind of hard to be a prophet in your own land, but when you have a podcast and you are building an audience around the world, suddenly the people in your own town start paying attention to you, even though you've been there the whole time, right? And so, yes, the podcast increases our visibility, and we get lots of coaching opportunities to work with founders and CEOs of small, mid-sized businesses, and also a lot of corporations.
Okay, so the podcast essentially you've been doing for 5 years with no real, financial goals from it. You're just getting like a byproduct because it's a sister company.
Yes,
sister, to your coaching business. But now that you are shifting gears and you're going to have this course and you're going to have this membership offering.
Yes. Okay. It only took me 5 years to finally be comfortable to do all that. And also listen, to be honest with you, it's also, I feel good that I really truly understand now that what we're creating is what many of the founders have asked for. And so I also look at it as not only that I'm giving back to founders, but also, as I said before, kind of a research study.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, by the way.
My pleasure.
So, we're running a little bit low on time here. knowing that there's a lot of people out there who have hidden wisdom, hidden knowledge that aren't sharing, or maybe people that are sharing but could be sharing on a larger level or going bigger with what they're doing. Do you have any, before I open the floor for you to talk a little bit more about your brand, do you have any last words for the listeners here today?
I do. Now more than ever, you can share your life's wisdom, knowledge, skills, and abilities in a way that can help a group of people and also contribute to your positive financial situation. One book that I love and I still recommend to people, Brendan Burchard's book, The Millionaire Messenger, is a really great resource to be able to convince you that you have knowledge in a certain area. There's so many people now who I've like paid attention to over the years who've reinforced that with me, from whether it's Brendan Burchard or David Simon Garland or Amy Porterfield or John Lee Dumas or Pat Flynn, who was on the podcast. The ability to be able to quote unquote monetize your knowledge and also help a group of people who you love to serve and help. The barrier to entry to that has never been lower. So go do it.
Awesome. Yeah, that's powerful. All right. So, keep in mind, I'm going to be sharing links to all your social medias. I have it all. So I'll be putting that in the show notes of this episode on the Why Influence website. It's whyinfluence.com. But what's the best way for people to reach out to you or get in touch with you or engage with you? Like, what's your preferred method so that the listeners know how to do that?
Yeah, LinkedIn is my place. I'm easy to find. I'm the only Todd Uterstaedt in LinkedIn. LinkedIn is my favorite place, and in there you can get the links to the podcast, which is on all the platforms. And also check out stressfreefounder.com, where we have a coming soon page up right now at stressfreefounder.com for people to be able to sign up for our course when we start letting people know more about when that's going live.
Okay. And if someone got something out, some value that they want to share, that they got value from you, is LinkedIn still the best? Maybe send a connection with a note saying I heard you on Why Influence. Is that
that'd be great? And they can email me too, Todd@FromFounderCEO.com. But I love LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great resource, an underutilized resource, and I also feel like the conversations are a lot more professional, kind-hearted than a lot of other platforms. Like I'm on Twitter, but I don't like Twitter very much because it feels like people are mean and nasty on Twitter. Yeah. But on LinkedIn, they seem to be kind and professional for the most part. And so, yeah, reach out on LinkedIn would be the best place.
Awesome. Well, Todd, I appreciate you taking the time to come on here today and share why you're sharing, and as well as a lot of tips and tricks that you've gone through and learned through your podcasting career and the sharing career. So I really appreciate it, and I know that the listeners do too.
Thanks, Jeremy. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Sure. And so before I let you go, I like to ask one last thing, which is, I'm still in my journey of trying to become a better, interviewer and podcast host. So I'm just curious if you have any feedback based on, how it is on your side of the table here. Like, do you have any feedback for me with how this went, or just the whole interaction? Any kind of feedback?
Well, I love how the fact that you, before a guest comes on your show, you give them an idea about the focal point. And before we started recording too, you said, "Hey, Todd, are you okay if we switch things up a bit?" So, I mean, you're really good at making people feel comfortable, I think. And I can't think of any things to improve, because I think you did a really good job in setting all this up, and also the cadence of the podcast. I mean, it's clear to me you're interested in making sure that the guest is comfortable and also your audience gets great value.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. All right. Well, I'll put all the links to Todd in the description and the show notes for the episode. So if you're looking to learn more about Todd, listen to his podcast, which he's got a ton of awesome, amazing episodes, then go check out From Founder to CEO podcast. And thanks for tuning in today.